I never wanted to raise my own children. There, I said it. Not in the poetic way people use when they're overwhelmed or tired, not as a passing thought that flickers and disappears. I mean it in the quiet, steady way a truth sits inside you for years, shaping your choices long before you have the courage to name it. I didn't want to be the one waking up at night, or packing lunches, or sitting in school corridors waiting for doors to open. I didn't want to braid hair or tie shoes, or pretend to enjoy conversations I wasn't present for. I told myself it was ambition, that my career needed focus, that I was building something important. But even now, when I strip all the excuses down to bone, the simplest truth is the one I avoided most. I didn't want the daily texture of motherhood. I didn't want the closeness. I didn't want the dependence. So I handed them to my mother, piece by piece, year after year, until the arrangement stopped feeling like a choice and became the structure of our lives. She never questioned it. She stepped in with a kind of steady devotion I never managed to find in myself, opening her door to them the way most open their arms. And I let her. I let her do what I couldn't do, what I didn't want to do. And I told myself it was temporary, practical, necessary. I was young. I needed to work. I needed to get somewhere. I needed a life that wasn't built around small hands pulling at my sleeves. For a long time, I carried that truth like a secret I could manage, if I just didn't look at it too directly. I smiled when people said I was strong, ambitious, smart, to focus on my future. I nodded when colleagues assumed my mother helped a bit. I let the lie breathe because it kept me moving, and movement was the only thing that kept the silence at bay. I learned early how to function without feeling too much, how to stay slightly outside my own life without anyone noticing the gap. And for years it worked. I worked, I climbed, I traveled. I made the money I thought would justify everything. Every promotion felt like another brick in the wall I was building between who I was and who I was supposed to be. And yet, under all of that, the truth kept humming, low and steady, like a sound you hear only when the world around you finally quiets down. I knew why I'd left them there. I knew it wasn't noble. I knew it wasn't brave. I knew it wasn't love, at least not in the form everyone expects from a mother. But I kept going anyway, kept pretending that one day when I made it, when life slowed down, when everything I'd sacrificed for finally paid off, I would return to them with open arms, ready to be the version of myself I'd postponed. I told myself they would understand. I told myself children are resilient. I told myself love is automatic, that biology would do the heavy lifting I avoided. I told myself so many things. But under all the layers of explanation, the truth stayed the same. I gave my children to my mother because I didn't want to raise them. And I lived with that truth quietly, almost calmly, for years, until the silence around it grew too big to ignore. I used to picture people hearing this and assuming there must have been something terrible in my past, some wound that made me distant, some trauma that explained everything neatly. But there wasn't. My life was boring in the way stable lives usually are. A small apartment at first, then a bigger one. A job that paid little, then a job that paid more. Commutes, meetings, plastic containers of food reheated late at night. My mother lived 20 minutes away, close enough for convenience, far enough that I could pretend the distance was practical, not emotional. She'd send me photos sometimes, the kids at the park, the kids eating soup, the kids asleep on the couch with their hair sticking to their foreheads. I'd smile at the images, save them automatically, then set my phone down and go back to whatever I was doing. My colleagues thought I was admirable, balancing everything. They'd joke about how lucky I was to have such a supportive mom, and I'd laugh along, letting them imagine a version of my life I didn't bother correcting. On weekends, I'd stop by for an hour or two, bring pastries, kiss the tops of their heads like a visiting aunt, not a mother coming home. My mother never scolded me for it. She never sighed or looked disappointed. She just handed me a plate, asked if I'd eaten, and filled the space I kept stepping out of. The house always smelled like broth or freshly washed clothes. Their drawings covered the fridge. their little jackets hung by the door. Everything in her home felt lived in, warm, familiar. Everything in mine felt staged, clean, quiet. A place you passed through, not a place where someone waited for you. People talk about maternal instinct as if it's a universal switch. They speak about love as if it comes attached to birth. They assume wanting to be there is natural. I kept waiting to feel that natural pull, that softness people describe. But most days I felt nothing, not revulsion, not frustration, just a kind of distance, like I was watching someone else's story unfold. I'd sit at the dinner table during visits, watching them chatter around my mother, and I'd feel this strange awareness that the rhythm of the room didn't include me. Not because I was unwelcome, but because everything important between them had already happened in all the days I missed. Diapers changed, first steps taken, scraped knees kissed, bedtime stories read twice because they asked for more. Those moments lived in their muscles, their memories, the easy way they climbed onto her lap without thinking. And I wasn't part of it. Not really. I suppose the saddest part is that for a long time, I thought this was fine, expected even. I told myself everyone adapts differently. Some parents are sentimental, others practical, some stay home, others work. I narrativized it until it sounded almost noble. But sometimes late at night, I'd find myself standing in my own kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator sounding louder than it should, asking a question I never wanted to confront. If everything in my life was so normal, then why did it feel like I was missing something fundamental? Why did the house feel colder after every visit? Why did I always leave early? It didn't add up, and that mismatch, that quiet contradiction between the life I lived and the life that was supposed to feel meaningful. That was where the discomfort began. I never admitted any of this to anyone, not even to myself, not fully. I just kept moving, kept working, kept letting my mother be the center of a story I couldn't bring myself to step into. And at the time, I thought that meant nothing. But now I can see it was already the beginning of a distance that would only grow. I told myself that doing everything right would eventually bridge the gap. I bought the new clothes when they grew out of the old ones. I transferred money to my mother without her asking. I showed up for birthdays with wrapped gifts and a practiced smile. I made sure the table was full when they came to my place, even if the food went untouched because they were too busy running back to her arms. I performed motherhood the way someone might follow instructions from a manual, step by step, efficiently, without ever letting it get too close. I thought consistency would translate into connection. I thought if I kept doing the things a mother should do, one day the feeling behind those gestures would finally appear. But the truth was quieter than that. I could be in the same room with them and still feel like I was behind glass. They would tell me about their day, and I'd listen, nodding in the right places. But their words felt like objects placed in my hands, something to hold for a moment and then set aside. My mother would watch me sometimes, her eyes soft, not judgmental, just aware. She had a way of seeing the space between my actions and my feelings without naming it. I think she hoped I'd grow into the role, the way some people grow into adulthood after stumbling through their early 20s. But roles built on pretense don't fill themselves. They just get heavier. I remember one small moment that still sits with me. It was winter, and the oldest had caught a cold. I went to visit, brought medicine, sat on the edge of the bed while he sniffled and stared at cartoons. He reached for my hand, lightly, like he was testing something, and I didn't pull away. But I didn't move closer either. I just let his fingers rest on mine, unsure what to do with that fragile, simple need. My mother walked in quietly, saw us, and her face softened in a way I didn't know how to mirror. She took a blanket from the chair, tucked him in, brushed his hair aside. He relaxed instantly, and I realized that what she had with them wasn't the result of years or blood or duty. It was presence, a kind of steady attention I never learned to give. I felt like someone imitating a language I'd never bothered to learn fluently, and they could feel it. Not in a dramatic way. Children rarely think in those terms, but in the way they hesitated before climbing into my lap, or looked toward my mother before answering my questions, as if checking with the person they trusted more. I tried to correct it sometimes, tried to be more enthusiastic, more warm, more involved. But everything I did felt slightly delayed, like I was reacting a second too late. The truth is, I could fulfill the role, the duties, the obligations, the logistics, but inside, I stayed distant. I didn't hate them. I didn't love them the way people describe loving their children either. I hovered in a middle place that felt functional but empty, like I was maintaining a machine instead of raising human beings. And yet on paper, I looked perfect. A mother who worked tirelessly, who provided, who never disappeared entirely, who gave her children a stable upbringing in the safest hands she knew. I thought that counted for something. I thought being reliable was the same as being close. But the older they got, the more I started to understand the difference. They didn't run to me when I arrived. They didn't seek my attention. They didn't fight for my approval or cling to my leg. They treated me with politeness, a kind of careful affection usually reserved for extended family. And every time I noticed it, I told myself it was temporary, that one day the thread between us would tighten again. But the truth was already written in the tiny moments, the hesitant hugs, the way they said goodbye to me with one arm still around my mother's waist, the small unconscious distance they kept. I played the role, but I wasn't the mother in their story, not in the way that mattered. And somewhere deep down, even then, I think I knew it. It didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic collapse, no shouting, no sudden revelation. It was a quiet day, like most of them. I had come back from a long trip, a conference in another country, 5 nights in a hotel where everything was folded and smooth for me, where no one needed anything from me except my signature at checkout. When I got home, the apartment felt different, too clean, too silent, like a room waiting for someone who had no reason to return. I dropped my suitcase in the hallway and stood there longer than made sense, staring at the blank walls, the untouched plants, the air that didn't hold anyone's scent but mine. For the first time, the success I'd spent years climbing toward didn't feel like arrival. It felt like landing somewhere I didn't recognize. The next morning, I drove to my mother's house with a bag of gifts I'd brought from abroad. Expensive, thoughtful things I'd chosen carefully, trying to make the distance look intentional. The kids were in the kitchen, still in pajamas, laughing at something on the floor. They didn't run to me. They didn't even look up right away. When they finally did, their eyes lit up for a moment. Not for me, I realized, but for the bag in my hand. My mother greeted me like always, warm, steady, a little tired around the eyes. She handed me a cup of tea, asked about the trip, nodded politely as if she were listening to news from a distant city, not the life of her own daughter. I watched her move around the kitchen. The ease of it, the familiarity, the small gestures she didn't seem to think about. She put a plate in front of one child without looking, brushed crumbs from another's hair, nudged the third toward a chair. That kitchen was the center of their world, and I was a visitor standing by the doorway. I set the gifts on the table. They opened them quickly, loudly, thanking me in the distracted way children thank someone they don't fully connect with. Then they ran back to my mother, clutching the gifts but leaning into her side. One of them called her Mama without thinking. Not a joke, not confusion, just instinct. Instinct built from years of mornings and nights and scraped knees and lullabies I never sang. My mother froze for half a second. So did I. Then she placed her hand gently on the child's shoulder and kept talking, as if nothing unusual had happened. But something in my chest tightened. Not jealousy, not anger, just the slow, cold realization of a truth I'd avoided for too long. They didn't see me as their mother. They saw me as the woman who visited, who brought things, who lived a life somewhere else. A woman with the right face and the wrong presence. I sat at the table, trying to smile, trying to speak, trying to find a place in the room that didn't feel borrowed. But everything I said sounded like small talk. Everything I did felt like an interruption. At one point, my mother asked the youngest to bring Mama her glasses, and he took them straight to her, placing them in her hand with that soft trust children give only to the person who tucks them in at night. I didn't correct him. I didn't say a word. I just watched. And in that moment, the story I'd been telling myself for years, that I would come back fully one day, that they would naturally return to me, that love was waiting like a paused movie, cracked completely. Later, when they all went to the living room, I stayed behind in the kitchen. The window was open. A breeze moved the curtains. I could hear their voices from the next room, not calling for me, not asking me to join, just living in a world where I was a guest. I sat down at the table, rested my hands on the wood my mother had scrubbed 1,000 times, and felt something settle inside me. Not grief, not guilt, just the weight of truth finally standing still. I had built a life that didn't include the everyday texture of motherhood, and now that texture belonged to someone else, completely, permanently. And the strangest part was realizing how quiet the moment felt. No drama, no collapse. Just a simple, irrefutable understanding. Whatever role I'd imagined reclaiming someday was already gone. Not stolen, not lost. Just never really mine to begin with. I stayed there until the voices faded into the soft hum of the house. And for the first time, I didn't pretend it would be different later. I knew exactly what I had become and what I had not. I think what struck me most once everything settled was how quietly the truth fit into place when I finally stopped fighting it. No confrontation, no reckoning, just life continuing around me as if it had already accepted my absence long before I noticed it myself. My mother kept raising them with that calm steadiness she'd always had. The kids grew into their rhythms, into their routines, into a world where I was a visitor with gifts, not a center they revolved around. And I moved through it all like someone watching a story they used to think they would someday join. I kept working. I earned more than I ever imagined. I bought the house I once dreamed about. But when I walked through it, all that space, all that quiet, I understood how separate comfort is from connection. Money builds walls, not memories. I'd show up with expensive presents, and they'd thank me politely before running back to her, calling her Mama without hesitation. I never corrected them. The word belonged to the one who stayed. There was no dramatic turning point, no late redemption, just the slow, steady realization that love grows where time is spent, not where intentions were once promised. She was there. I wasn't, and now the shape of that truth is permanent. I don't resent them for it. I don't resent her. If anything, I'm grateful she gave them what I couldn't even recognize as missing. So here I am, in this quiet house, with all the success I thought would eventually make things right, and none of the closeness I once assumed would happen on its own. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not trying to rewrite anything. I'm just finally honest about the life I built and the distance baked into it. There's no lesson at the end of this, no soft hope, just this simple final truth. They call her Mama. And when I hear it, something inside me goes still. Not in pain, not in anger, just in acceptance of what was mine to lose long before I understood I was losing it.